solar panels being installed on my property.
Our listeners are aware and engaged, but more than that, they are loyal. When they hear empowering messages that uplift their community and help them live better lives, they respond. No medium reaches this coveted black audience like KBLA Talk 1580. So, hit us up today at smb@kbla1580.com and let us help you connect with our loyal listeners. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black under the bud.
That's my friend Wynton Marsalis. He's the best. The greatest artist on that instrument of his generation. And beautiful sounds to get us into this hour as we celebrate the life and legend of Phil Donahue. We'll get to that in just a second. And let me tell you first, on the B side of this hour, we'll have a conversation with Middle East expert Trita Parsi about the escalating tension and conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, even as the war in Gaza rages on. But we commenced this hour in conversation with our friend David Masciotra, a brilliant writer who I've invited on this program because he wrote a beautiful piece in tribute to my friend and brother Phil Donahue just days ago. Donahue, as you know, passed away last week. He passed away last Sunday. It was announced on Monday that he had made his transition while we were in Chicago at the DNC. And how fitting was that? Because in many ways, Donahue put Chicago on the map. Before there was Oprah, there was Phil Donahue. And Donahue showed so many of us, yours truly included, the way. As a matter of fact, I was such a Phil Donahue fan. I watched Donahue every day when I came home from school, or as often as I could, without getting in trouble for not doing my homework. But I was anxious to get to that television to watch Phil Donahue, having no idea that one day I'd be doing what Donahue did better than anybody. But imagine years later that I would not just meet Phil Donahue, but get to know Phil Donahue and to be able to call Phil Donahue a friend and a brother of mine. And because I was so young when Donahue was at his height, he passed away Sunday at the age of 88, last Sunday. Because I was too young to ever be a guest on the Donahue program. For one of my books, the new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, that book drops tomorrow. And I'm humbled and almost scared to tell you that that's my 25th book. My 25th book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, drops tomorrow. But one of these books some years ago came out. And I called Phil Donahue and said, Phil, I'm going to be in New York City appearing at the 92nd Street Y. If you are an author, everybody wants to be on stage at the 92nd Street Y. It's a huge venue and everybody comes out for your book lecture and signings when you're at the 92nd Street Y. So the Y had invited me to come to New York City to appear on their stage for this particular book that I had out. And they asked me who I wanted to be in conversation with. I said, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. I called Phil Donahue, who lived in New York, and I said, Phil, I'm coming to New York. I'm going to be at the Y, 92nd Street Y, for a book event, and I would be honored and humbled if you would do me the favor of interviewing me about my book on stage in New York City. Donahue said, Tavis, absolutely. I wouldn't miss it. And so Phil Donahue and I sat on stage for a couple hours talking about this book and taking audience Q&A. It was the closest I would ever get to being interviewed on his program by Phil Donahue. It was a night that I will never forget. Before I commence my conversation with David Masciotra about how Phil Donahue showed all of us that open-mindedness is crucial for democracy. And ain't that a message that ought to resonate right about now? Open-mindedness is crucial for our experiment in democracy. First, some sound from Phil Donahue.
First Donahue show, November 7th, 1967. It was the Phil Donahue show, very cleverly named. Madeline Murray, 10:30 a.m., Channel 2, Dayton, Ohio. There's no God, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no angels. When you die, you go in the ground and you biodegrade as the worms eat you. Well, honest to goodness, I didn't think I was going to be able to get out of the building. I mean, can you imagine? People went berserk. Guys would finish their haircut in the barbershop and stay till the show. They couldn't take their eyes off this woman who was out there railing about. We knew that we were visually boring. We knew that, you know, if callers are going to call, you're going to have, it's going to be like watching paint dry. We knew if we had any chance to succeed, you know, we couldn't be talking about juvenile delinquency or all these, you know, all these broad, very imprecise issues that are often discussed at Rotary Club meetings and other places. We knew we had to have personalities who moved you to go to that phone and make a phone call. I mean, truly, she almost paralyzed the entire Baldwin Exchange, which is what we were on then in Dayton, Ohio. I mean, people couldn't get their doctors, hospital. I mean, really, the response was so intense that we paralyzed part of the phone system in Dayton.
Of course he did, because he's Phil Donahue, and I'm going to miss him. But what an amazing example of how to do what we do in these spaces, even the podcast world these days, with radio, television, podcast, print. Donahue showed you how to do it. When we come forward, we'll commence our conversation with David Masciotra about his wonderful piece in tribute to Phil Donahue. We'll let David sound off on how he views the indelible impact of the legacy of Phil Donahue, and we'll talk about David's book as well, which I will link nicely in this frame of open-mindedness that is in democracy. His book is called Exurbia Now, The Battleground of American Democracy. Exurbia Now, The Battleground of American Democracy. That's David's most recent book. But we'll talk about Phil Donahue when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From Lamert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
Make a move into a home of your own. With City National Bank's Ladder Up Home Loan Grant, you could receive up to $20,000 that you never need to pay back. Use it toward your down payment, save on closing costs, or to buy down your mortgage rate. Find out more at cnb.com/ladderuphome. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Property must be in a qualifying market in California, New York, or New Jersey. Additional terms and conditions apply. Not all applicants will qualify. Terms are subject to change without notice. City National Bank is an equal housing lender. Member FDIC. NMLS number 536994.
I occasionally have nerve discomfort in my hands, so the things I love to do...
Let's play something, Grandma.
...became difficult as I got older.
If you have occasional stabbing and burning in your hands and feet, try Nervive Nerve Relief. Nervive's clinically studied dose of alpha-lipoic acid reduces occasional nerve discomfort in as little as 7 days with continued daily use. Say yes to healthy nerves with Nervive Nerve Relief. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Febreze. As a rideshare driver, I love keeping my car smelling fresh and clean. So when I'm driving, I only trust new Febreze car vent clips, now with 3 times greater scent control, because it's that little touch that sets me apart. I can turn the intensity down for subtle freshness, or I can turn it up for when I want lots of scent. So whether it's set to low, medium, or high, with new Febreze car, I know my car's going to smell amazing, which keeps my driver rating right where it belongs. Picking up, Oscar!
Texting enrolls you into recurring automated text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Message and data rates may apply.
Hey, Dan, how you doing? Haven't seen you around the gym for a while.
Yeah, I've really fallen off. Since I turned 40, I just don't get the results I used to get.
Could be lower testosterone.
Lower T?
Yeah, I went through it a while back. Once you hit 40, your body has less free testosterone. I got Nugenix Total T, and it's made a huge difference for me.
I've seen that ad on TV. Is it for real?
Oh, yeah. The key ingredient is something called Tesnor, which helps boost free and total testosterone levels to help you trim up and stay lean.
And it's made a difference for you?
Man, I feel like I'm in my 20s again, at work, in the gym, and in the bedroom.
Are they still giving out complimentary bottles for people to try it for themselves?
Yeah, you just need to send them a text.
Text LION to 42424 right now for your complimentary bottle of Nugenix Total T, the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC. Plus, text now and we'll include a bottle of Nugenix Thermo, our most powerful fat incinerator ever, to help you get back into shape fast, absolutely free. Text LION to 42424. That's LION to 42424.
He's a paradigm pioneer. and the top-rated African-American talk show host in the nation, according to Talkers Magazine. You're tapped in with Tavis Smiley right now.
We continue our tribute to the late, great Phil Donahue, who passed away last Sunday at the age of 88. And my friend and brother David Masciotra wrote a brilliant piece in tribute to Phil Donahue that you can find on salon.com. It's called Phil Donahue Showed How Feminism and Open-Mindedness Are Crucial for Democracy. Please welcome David back to this program. David, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's great to be with you.
It's good to hear your voice once again. We'll get to your book a little bit later in this conversation, but I want to spend some time, of course, in tribute to Phil Donahue. As I said a moment ago, I loved your piece. Tell me more.
Well, thank you so much, and I can't think of any forum better to have this conversation than your program, because you're a host of the True Phil Donahue School of intellectualism and open-mindedness, and inviting a broad range of guests to facilitate a conversation that serves our democracy. I discovered Phil Donahue due to his short-lived MSNBC program, which became the highest-rated show on that network before the network unceremoniously canceled him because he was opposed to the invasion of Iraq, and he was opposed to many of the national security policies of the Bush administration.
That's right.
But going back, but going back and rediscovering his work on Daytime and reading his memoir, it became evident that he represented the best of our media and the best of the democratic impulse, which I would classify as the impulse to prioritize learning over prejudice and to prioritize conversation over proselytization.
Yeah.
And that's what Donahue did. He invited everyone ranging from David Duke to Louis Farrakhan, feminists to those who put unapologetic arguments forward for patriarchy, and he charted territory where few others would dare to tread. So he televised a same-sex wedding long before gay marriage was legal. He televised an abortion, and you can imagine how controversial that was. Cost him viewers, cost him stations and syndication. And he had a voice that was aggressive, fiery, but also, as paradoxical as it may seem, humble. He was never afraid to learn and evolve with his predominantly women audience, and the nation learned and evolved with him. And I would say that he was alone at the time, and we've come full circle. We don't have that type of voice in mainstream media any longer. We don't see that kind of voice on television. Our conversations become much more narrow, much more biased, and it's created something of an epistemic crisis among the American public, in which people receive only information that affirms their pre-held assumptions.
No, you are spot on, and that is the best of what Phil Donahue was. Let me circle back to a couple of things you've said. Number one, the very first time I saw the brother minister was when he appeared on Donahue. I said, who is this Louis Farrakhan? I'm just a kid growing up in Indiana. I didn't know who Minister Farrakhan was. But I remember the first time I saw him on television, it was on Donahue. To your point, Donahue was bold enough way back then. He was in Chicago. Minister Farrakhan makes his home, of course, in Chicago. I was in Chicago last week while there for the convention. I checked in on the brother minister, and he's holding on. He's holding on. But I checked in on him last week while I was in Chicago. But the very first time I saw him was when he appeared on Donahue. And again, it just underscores how bold Donahue was even then to put divergent, differing voices on national television, whether folk agreed or disagreed. But I want to circle back to where you started this conversation, because I don't want people who don't remember this to forget it, and I don't want those who never heard it to be unaware of it, particularly in this unique American moment. I mentioned earlier we're going to talk to Trita Parsi in my last half hour today about what's going on in the Middle East. and the fight that Israel is now engaged in with Hezbollah, even as the war in Gaza rages on. No Palestinian voice, no pro-Palestinian voice had a chance to get to the microphone last week at the DNC in Chicago. We discussed that in our first hour today. So the timing of this conversation about Donahue and what he said and did years ago is terribly propitious. And here you come now brilliantly and thankfully reminding us of how Donahue got kicked off of MSNBC. He had a long run on daytime television. He sort of retired and he walked away. And then he comes back on this network called MSNBC that you all watch every day for its liberal/progressive stance. Really not that progressive, but more liberal stance clearly than Fox News. But let me ask David to tell you what MSNBC did to Phil Donahue back in the day and why they did it. Tell me more, David.
Yeah, Phil Donahue makes his debut on MSNBC in 2002, 6 years going off the air, and of course winning 20 Emmys and a Peabody. And he steadily built an audience into early 2003, becoming the highest-rated show on the network and the second highest-rated in his time slot. Bill O'Reilly, his competitor at Fox, had the distinction of having the highest ratings on cable news in his time slot. But with little warning, little notice, and at first little way to understand, MSNBC cancels Donahue just as the Bush administration is preparing to launch its invasion of Iraq with congressional approval. Don't want to let them off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Then media analysts and, of course, Donahue's viewers were perplexed by this. Why would they cut their highest-rated program? An internal memo that had been circulating the offices of MSNBC leaked to a media criticism website, was then later picked up by the New York Times, in which MSNBC executives were discussing how they could not afford to have the face of their network be an anti-war liberal, using their words, when their competitors were waving the flag at every opportunity. So it wasn't a financial decision. It wasn't a ratings-driven decision. It was purely an ideological decision, one that Noam Chomsky, who was a regular guest of Donahue's — Donahue was typically the only person who would have Chomsky on the air — would understand and place in his analysis of manufacturing consent.
Manufacturing consent. The fascinating part about what you're sharing now, I remind our audience of what we discussed in the first hour about all of this nationalism and all the flag waving at the DNC last week and the chants of USA, USA, USA. That nationalism is dangerous. It is dangerous. And I make a clear distinction between patriotism and nationalism. Don't get it twisted. They are not the same things. But that nationalism is dangerous, and that's what Donahue refused to do all those years ago. Chant USA, 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 and wave the flag. He challenged the powers that be politically, economically, socially, culturally. He involved and invited everybody into the conversation. The first time, frankly, I saw Cornel West. This audience knows Cornel West is a dear friend of mine all these years later. But I saw Cornel West for the first time on Donahue. So it's amazing, all these people that I've gotten to know in my life and over the course of my career who I first witnessed on national television on Phil Donahue's program. Let me just ask you, speaking of MSNBC and its parent company, to what extent do you think that the corporate media has put us in this situation where, as you mentioned earlier, we don't have Donahue-like figures with that kind of boldness anymore?
The corporate media has consistently undermined the values of democracy by reducing our conversation intellectually and politically. Going in reverse order, politically, as they've seemingly become more progressive according to their own perception of themselves that they advertise, they've narrowed the conversation to a partisan debate. So anything that exists outside of the Democrats versus the Republicans doesn't make it onto the airwaves. And that coincides with an intellectual decline in our culture, that now everything is so profit-driven. The kind of intelligent, challenging conversations that you host and that Donahue before you hosted and that Donahue's hero, Studs Terkel, hosted no longer generate the revenue that these networks want to generate. So instead we get a dumbed-down, restrictive conversation that revolves around gimmicks and dumb debates and dumb jokes. And all that does is lead to a type of intellectual and political atrophy. Walt Whitman, the great American poet, said to live in a democracy, one must perfect the muscles of life's gymnasium. Well, the gymnasium that the corporate media gives us has faulty equipment and treadmills that only move at snail speed, and therefore the citizens become weaker, and the citizens cannot recognize the threat that you just articulated very well of this nationalism. I mean, Kamala Harris, and I'm voting for her, and I very much hope she wins, she said in her speech that the most awesome and greatest privilege on earth is to be an American. Now, that's exactly the type of chauvinism that Phil Donahue saw as dangerous and saw as damaging to constructing the kind of citizenship necessary to maintain and advance a multiracial democracy.
And then she said, as you know, that America is the greatest story ever told, and that's where we have to draw the line. We love Kamala, we're going to support Kamala, but you got to tell the truth, and that is not the truth, Kamala. We love you, but that ain't the truth. America is not the greatest story ever told. I digress on that. Too much spectacle. I'm watching my clock. I got about 6 minutes left here. Let me just ask you a quick question. Not a question, but give you a chance just to say a quick word about Jesse Jackson. You've written so brilliantly, David, over the course of your career, and I'm always honored to be in dialogue with you, but nobody's written better about the legacy and the impact of Jesse Jackson Sr. the way you have. In Chicago last week, as you know, last Sunday night, there was a huge tribute to Jesse Jackson before the convention officially started on Monday. It's clear that Jesse Jackson, not unlike the brother minister I mentioned earlier, Minister Farrakhan, you mentioned earlier, all of us at some point have to do that dance with mortality. And Minister Farrakhan is doing that dance with mortality. Jesse Jackson is doing that dance with mortality. Say a brief word about Jesse and his legacy celebrated last week in Chicago, and then we'll close with a few minutes about your text.
Well, Jesse Jackson invented what is best about the modern-day Democratic Party, the fact that it's multiracial, the fact that it's open to people of all different races, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, and he has dedicated his life to serving this democracy and making our policies from the local to federal level more progressive and inclusive and equal, and making our foreign policy more peace-oriented rather than militaristic. I will say that I thought the tribute that the DNC did for him on Monday evening was long overdue and richly deserved. But to our earlier conversation, I found it a little painfully ironic that when Jesse Jackson no longer can speak with great force, when he has great difficulty speaking, they feature him center stage at the DNC, and CNN and MSNBC cast praise upon him. But all those years that he spoke so forcefully, he was not given a primetime slot at the DNC. He was not featured on CNN or MSNBC. And it reminds me of what Jesse Jackson said himself during one of my many conversations with him. He said, "We love martyrs,
that's right,
not marchers." So now that they see Jesse Jackson becoming a martyr and he's no longer in the role of a marcher, they're all clamoring to praise him.
Yeah. They did Ali the same way. When he had the shakes and the Parkinson's and all that, they treated Ali the same way. It's hard for them to process warriors in real time. I digress. I've got 3.5 minutes left. I'll give it all to you. Talk to me about your new text, Exerbia Now, the Battleground of American Democracy.
Well, thank you very much, Tavis, and thanks for being such a gracious host. It's always a thrill to speak with you as well. I remember watching your show every night when I was in high school, and I love being on your radio show. And congratulations on all the success. We need your voice.
Thank you.
my book, Exurbia Now, The Battleground of American Democracy, begins with political geography, looking at exurban towns, which are towns beyond the suburbs, on the fringes of cities, where research indicates support for Trump is at its highest, and where the most rabid, right-wing, hateful, anti-democratic, small d, members of Congress represent. They have predominantly exurban districts. So I look at what is going on in these districts that's creating this authoritarian movement, and how is it reactionary and reactive against the changing demographics of America. As America becomes more diverse, as Black, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asians become more prominent in positions of power, along with women and along with LGBT Americans, how is this right-wing movement afoot in exurbia, which are these communities of isolation where the only recreational venue is typically a megachurch, reacting by waging war against the very system that made the racial, gender, and sexual progress of America possible. So it takes a look at the geography, and it does so from someone who lives amongst where I write. I live in a small town of Indiana outside Chicago.
Yep, my home state of Indiana. I'm talking now to my producers, Faraji and Jay-Z, who are listening, of course. I want to get David back on the program as quickly as we can to talk just about the text, Exurbia Now. I wanted to have him on today for this tribute to Phil Donahue and the brilliant piece he wrote about Donahue on Salon.com. Again, that piece is called Phil Donahue Showed How Feminism and Open-Mindedness Are Crucial for Democracy. Google that piece, find it on Salon, read it for yourself. It's a wonderful tribute to, again, our now departed friend and brother, the late, great Phil Donahue. But we'll get David back on this program in the days to come here to talk about his book in greater detail. It's a fascinating bit of work he's done for this text called Exurbia Now, The Battleground of American Democracy. So we'll talk to David soon specifically about the text. But David, thank you for your written, beautiful words about Phil Donahue. It's great to have you on this program, and we'll be talking very soon, as I just said.
Thank you. To be in the company of Wynton Marsalis and Tavis Smiley. What an honor.
You're too kind, man. That's our conversation with David Masciotra in tribute to the late, great Phil Donahue. More when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Helping to stretch your moral and political imagination. This is Tavis Smiley.
Paid for by government.com. Did you know? The United States Mint has issued a new Morgan silver dollar coin in proof condition for the first time. Not only that, they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 400,000 of these legal tender silver dollars were issued. These first ever Morgan silver dollars are brand new with stunning mirror-like finish, minted by the iconic San Francisco Mint. Call now and you're guaranteed a new first ever 99.9% pure silver proof Morgan dollar. To learn more, call 1-800-973-9717. If you order now, you will receive a free coin collector bonus pack, a $25 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-973-9717 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. That's 1-800-973-9717.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Dr. Anthony Fauci, known for his high profile at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, is expected to make a full recovery after being hospitalized for the West Nile virus. He told CBS News he's out of the hospital and recuperating at home. Senator Cory Booker says the Biden administration is working to prevent escalation in the Middle East following an exchange of heavy fire between Israel and Hezbollah militants in Lebanon over the weekend. That's what the African-American New Jersey Democrat told CNN State of the Union. A free expression policy is being enacted for Rutgers University's 3 New Jersey campuses. The new protest policy requires an application for a permit to be completed 3 days prior to a protest and prohibits any encampments. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America N.A. Copyright 2024.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers continue to have the best record in Major League Baseball after Sunday's win over Tampa Bay. The Dodgers are 25 games over 500. They have a 3-game lead over Arizona in the NL West. The hard times continue for the Angels. They lost all 4 games in Toronto. The Angels will finish the season 0-7 against Toronto. The LA Sparks had a great opportunity Sunday to snap their 6-game losing streak, but they blew a 19-point lead in the fourth quarter at Dallas. The Sparks ended up losing by 3. They were outscored 40-18 in the fourth quarter. At 6-24, the Sparks have the WNBA's worst record. Florida A&M, the defending Black College Football national champion, held on for a 1-point win over Norfolk State. Florida A&M wins the SWAC MEAC Challenge. The annual classic between the two conferences kicks off the HBCU football season. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hey there, it's Karen.
And I'm Ernest. We're the co-hosts of Food for Thought with Karen and Ernest here on KBLA Talk 1580. Make sure you check us out Saturdays at 8 p.m.
And our rebroadcast happens on Sundays at 7 p.m. We'll be talking about the art of dining. We'll be giving food tips, talking to sommeliers, chefs, concierges, all the food influencers. Everything food, everything dining. And sometimes with some of our friends just hanging out and talking food.
And when you listen to our show, we have a segment called Hot Dishes. Sometimes unpopular opinions, but we said what we said and we meant what we meant.
Also, we do food reviews with who's hot and who's not.
Yeah, you make sure you guys check out Food for Thought with Karen and Ernest here on KBLA. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We're not just a thermometer recording and broadcasting popular opinion. We aim to be a thermostat, transforming the conversation about climate justice in our community. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
If you want a great-looking lawn next spring, now is the perfect time to get started, and nobody makes it easier or more affordable to get a green, healthy lawn than True Green. Sign up today for an annual plan and get 50% off one application. Visit TrueGreen.com today. Restrictions apply.
Did you know your life insurance is an asset you can sell? I'm Jay Jackson, CEO of Abacus Life. For almost 20 years, Abacus has been purchasing life insurance policies from seniors just like you. And at abacuspays.com, we've created a free policy value calculator so you can find out the worth of your policy in just seconds. There are no fees and no obligations. Get real value from your life insurance when you need it with Abacus. Learn more at abacuspays.com.
Our daughter Jessie loves playing detective.
But since we discovered she has sensitive skin, we've been playing detective too.
We thought the problem was our puppy.
But it was actually our old detergent. So we switched to Tide Free and Gentle.
Tide Free and Gentle has no dyes or perfumes, so it's gentle on her skin.
If it's gotta be clean, it's gotta be Tide Free and Gentle. This back-to-school season, Tide and Downy are giving back with $1.5 million in scholarships. Enter to win. No purchase necessary. US/DC 17+. End September 30th. Rules. Tide.com/scholarship/official rules.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Freedom is an endless meeting. So let's get back to it with Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Trita Parsi, who is a brilliant writer and co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. While we were in Chicago last week, we've discussed that a great deal on today's program. I offered you my commentary a few times in today's program about how it felt to be in Chicago and to see the DNC, the Democratic Party, not allow a single pro-Palestinian voice to get to that podium to humanize what's happening in that region of the world. It was debilitating and difficult, and yet we talked about it live inside the United Center unapologetically while we were in Chicago last week. But while we were in Chicago focusing on what was happening on the stage inside the United Center, there were developments in the Middle East, and I'm pleased to have Trita Parsi on now to talk about that part. Trita, good to hear you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing the best I can, man. If I complain, I'd be an end great. Let's make the most of these few minutes that we have between now and the close of our show today. As I said, we're watching the stage inside the United Center in Chicago. You're keeping your eye on the stage, but also on what's happening in the Middle East. We see the escalating tension and this conflict between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah as the war continues, of course, to rage on inside Gaza. Tell me more.
So, first of all, what you said about the DNC, I would just wholly agree with. It was quite demoralizing to see what Harris had chosen to believe is the right politics of this. I think it's unfortunately going to have very negative effects for her. But I think it's also important to recognize that while speakers were going up there and saying that the administration and Harris herself is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire, reality is that at this point, ceasefire talks have essentially become an instrument to sustain the war. Because they're not going anywhere, and they're not going anywhere mainly because the Biden administration is refusing to use its leverage to pressure the Israelis to agree to things that they say publicly they have agreed to. I mean, part of the reason why it's not going anywhere right now is because the Netanyahu government has just added a series of additional conditions and keeps on doing so without any consequences from the U.S. side. And as a result, the talks are just continuing endlessly while the bombings are also continuing endlessly. Then on top of that, of course, you now saw how the Hezbollah movement in Lebanon took action against Israel in what they say was in retaliation for the high-level assassination that Israel committed about 25 or so days ago against a very senior Hezbollah official. The world has been anticipating that something like this would happen, but it was very worrisome because if Hezbollah took a very significant military action, it could have led to further Israeli counter-escalation and a complete war. And of course, you have the Iranians in the mix here as well, who also say that they will retaliate for the assassination that took place in Tehran, but have not done so yet. What Hezbollah did, however, seems to have been very much designed towards it being able to say that it did something, that it inflicted some damage, it avenged their high-level official Shukr, but they did not escalate the war further. They communicated very clearly what they had done. They said that this is the end of this, for this moment at least. And these are the kind of messaging you want to have in case you really want to avoid further escalation. I think it's unclear exactly what they may have achieved militarily with this, but I find it interesting that the Israelis have now put in a media censorship. No Israeli media is allowed to report on what the damages have been. And if that's the case, that does seem to suggest that there may have actually been some significant military damage. Hezbollah did not target any civilian targets. And as a result, it's not readily visible exactly what they struck and what they achieved with it. They have themselves listed 11 targets that they say that they did strike. Right now, it seems like we're moving towards a situation in which hopefully there won't be any further escalation, but it's not entirely clear. And we have the wild card, which is that whenever the Netanyahu government has found itself to be in a bit of a political trouble, it has used escalation and these type of assassinations as a way of creating a new path forward for itself and divert attention from its other political challenges.
Tell me a bit more. I'm not naive. I get this, but I want you to put a finer point on what you meant when you said earlier that these ceasefire talks are going nowhere. So they're essentially being used to sustain the war. Unpack that.
Yeah, so we see how the administration earlier on refused to use the word ceasefire. When asked at one point if a ceasefire is possible, President Biden said that it's impossible, it will not happen. We saw how the Biden administration vetoed, I believe, 4 UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire, calling for the release of the hostages. But then suddenly there was a switch in which the Biden administration started to argue that it's actually pushing for a ceasefire and was engaged in these talks, but again, without using any of its leverage. And I think what has happened is that it's managed to co-opt the term. It's now positioning itself as if it's pursuing a ceasefire, and by that, reducing a lot of political heat and pressure at home, as well as internationally, while in reality, those talks are not really designed to go anywhere. They're designed to be continuous so that the administration can say, we are working tirelessly to do so, offset political pressure, but not achieve anything.
And then
there's a term here in Washington that is used for this type of a tactic. It's called motion without movement.
Motion without movement. Then you put on top of that, speaking of movement, here's an example of motion with movement. I hear your point about motion without movement. I want to come to the motion with movement. I'm talking specifically about those weapons that we continue to supply to Israel. So that's motion with movement. The weapons are absolutely moving in that direction, even as, on the other hand, you hear talk about, putting talk in air quotes, you can't see me, you hear talk about a ceasefire. That's just talk, but these weapons are motion with movement. Trita Parsi.
Absolutely. The Biden administration has just continued to send weapons endlessly to the Israelis. And just for people to understand how crucial that has been in sustaining the war and preventing a ceasefire. An Israeli general said already back in November of last year that if the United States were to cede its weapons shipments to Israel, Israel would have to stop the war within 5 days. This means that we could have stopped this war long time ago. Before 40,000 people, including more than half of them women and children, vast majority of them civilians, were being butchered and slaughtered with our weapons. But because the Biden administration has refused to even withhold some of those arms shipments, has refused to use that as a leverage to get flexibility from the Israelis on a ceasefire, we're now in a situation in which we're sustaining the war while pretending to pursue a ceasefire.
Speaking of motion and movement, he's still motioning right now, but he'll be moving out of the White House in January. Somebody's going to replace him. So there's motion, maybe not on this front in the Middle East, not much motion there, but there will be some movement on Joe Biden's part as he has to step aside just a few months from now after concluding his first term. And into that seat will step someone else. That someone else may be Kamala Harris, who we saw on stage last week at the DNC in Chicago. When we come forward, I want to ask Trita Parsi whether or not he saw anything, heard anything from Kamala Harris that would suggest that her policy would be in any way different, dramatically or slightly different. Anyway, does he sense that Kamala Harris's policy will be different than that we've seen from the Biden-Harris administration? That's the question. Will Harris-Walz be different than Biden-Harris on this particular issue? Trita Parsi's response to that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From California to the Carolinas, everybody's listening to Tavis. More when we come forward.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well-trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month.
If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your Senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
Tavis is like George and Wheezy. He's moving on up. Last year, Tavis was number 45 on the Talkers Magazine list of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America. Wait for it. Wait for it. The 2024 list was recently released, And Tavis has jumped to number 33 on the list of the nation's most important talkers, making him the highest-ranked African-American on the coveted roster. Congratulations to Tavis Smiley from all of us at KBLA Talk 1580. We've got you black.
Downy Rinse and Refresh. Break up with stinky clothes.
Rinse it out. Every now and then I get a little bit tired of the stinks that just will never come out. Oh, Downy in the rinse straight. Every now and then I rinse it out. One wash and it delivers. One wash, it smells so clean. Downy Rinse and Refresh, it's a dream.
Downy Rinse and Refresh removes 100% of odor in just one wash. Guaranteed.
Eggs are a staple in our diets, and there's only one egg with more delicious farm fresh taste plus superior nutrition. Eggland's Best. With more vitamins, including 6 times more vitamin D and 10 times more vitamin E, plus 25% less saturated fat than ordinary eggs. Available in so many delicious varieties. Classic, cage-free, and organic. Eggland's Best. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs.
Less monologue, more dialogue. Tavis Smiley continues right now.
It does indeed with Trita Parsi, who's co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, did you see anything on stage last week in Chicago that gives you reason to believe that that Harris-Walz will be different than Biden-Harris? I mean, you have to be clear about this, and I'm honest about this, transparent about it. Harris was number 2 in this administration, so whether she wanted to do something different or not, she's not the boss. Joe Biden was. But she will be the boss if she pulls this off. So do you sense that Harris-Walz on these issues will be any different than Biden-Harris?
So I didn't see anything that was encouraging at the DNC about this from her or from the others who spoke. I did see encouraging signs from Harris earlier on when she, for instance, met with Netanyahu, the language she used, the body language, the message she sent. But ever since, it seems that she's been backtracking that, and the DNC, of course, I have to be frank, was a huge disappointment on this issue, at least. Mm-hmm. Now, one can say that under normal circumstances, perhaps the politics of this issue would force her in that direction. The issue now, though, is that we're not in the usual situation. The politics of this is actually quite split. And amongst young people and specific minorities in key states that she needs to get, the politics of this is actually the opposite of what she did. She actually needs to come out much more firmly in favor of some form of a shift. And finesse that in a way to not entirely throw Biden under the bus, of course, because she was his vice president. But nevertheless, she's now taken a position that is, and used language in her talk that was indistinguishable from what Biden already has said. And as a result, that definitely fell below the expectation of most folks. I think we should at the same time be clear about one thing. You mentioned that she was number 2. Formally, that's correct. But I would say on this issue, she was not even in the room. This was an issue that essentially Biden kept 4 or 5 people abreast of. And that was the decision-making on this. Part of the reason why I think the decisions have been so erroneous is because it was such a small number of people. And he actually didn't let in someone like Harris into the decision-making on this issue. So I think it is fair to say that she actually should not be beholden to Biden's policy on this because she truly was not part of it. But she cannot count on people just giving her the benefit of the doubt without giving them something. And what she did at the DNC was actually backtracking from some of the positives that she already had offered.
When we come forward in our remaining moments with Trita Parsi, I want to ask him 2 questions. I'll tease them now and give him the time when we come forward, the time remaining to respond. The first question I want to ask him, and I think he has sort of already answered this, but I want to just make sure I'm being precise in his sentiment. The first question is whether or not we have averted a wider war for now in the Middle East. You heard him describe earlier exactly what Hezbollah did. They wanted to make it clear that they had to respond for the killing of this official inside their borders, but that was that, and they were done. And so I think Trita is trying to suggest to me that he believes that for the moment at least, we have averted a wider war in the Middle East? That's the first question. Second question is what he's looking at and what he's tracking that might be that thing that becomes game-changing between now and November. And by that thing, I mean, Trita knows exactly what I mean, that we got 70-some days left, whatever it is. That's a lifetime in politics. And if this Middle East thing blows up, that fundamentally shifts and changes how we view the two candidates for president. It just is. It's geopolitics at its best or at its worst, depending on how one looks at it. But I'm wondering what he's tracking and what he's most concerned about that might, in fact, be game-changing with regard to this presidential race between now and November. Those are the two questions, and we'll give Trita Parsi a chance to respond to that before we close this show when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good. Yeah, man. Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
You know where you want to go in life, and City National Bank can help. City National knows the dedication it takes to build your vision for the future into a reality, and our team is here for you. We have a wide range of options to help, from personal savings accounts to interest-bearing money market savings accounts and more, all designed to help you get where you want to go. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Learn more at cnb.com. City National Bank is a subsidiary of Royal Bank of Canada, member FDIC.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Febreze. So my home is also my office, and before I can focus, every room's gotta be clean. That means tidying up, then spraying my Febreze Air Mist. Ooh, that's fresh. Febreze Air Mist scents are all high quality. They fight any weird funk, and they give my air an instant boost of freshness. So not only does my home smell good, I feel good too. After I Febreze, it's time to start my day. Breathe happy, Febreze, la 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 la.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Trita Parsi for the remaining moments I have left in this conversation, about 3.5 minutes. He's co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, brilliant writer himself. Honored to have had him on for these 30 minutes to talk about what's happening in the Middle East while we've been focused on the stage at the DNC in Chicago, at least last week. So here are my two exit questions, Trita. First, whether or not it is your sense that for the moment we have averted a wider war.
I don't think we're out of the woods yet because only Hezbollah has responded so far. The Iranians have not. But the fact that they have responded separately or that they will respond separately is a clear indication that they are trying to respond, restore deterrence, avenge the person who was assassinated, but not escalate. Now, whether the Israelis see that way or not, of course, is a different story. But I think the signaling to the United States, to the rest of the world, clearly is an attempt not to escalate matters further. But I'll make a point that I made in the New York Times back in April, which is that back then, the Biden administration actually played a helpful role towards avoiding a further escalation, but it was only a tactical success within a larger strategic failure. Tactical success because their help was useful and was, to a certain extent, decisive towards avoiding that larger war. But it was strategically a failure because the only reason we're in this situation is because the United States has not been using its leverage to force a ceasefire in the first place and has fueled the war by constantly sending weapons to Israel. If it had prevented this war or stopped its continuation much earlier on, we would not be in this situation in the first place. And we would not be in a situation in which in April the Israelis are conducting assassinations that almost brings us to the brink of war. In August, again, they do the same thing. They'll probably do it again in October. How many times can we get lucky and avoid war? Probably not that many times. So if we truly want to avoid that war, we actually have to get to the root of the issue, and that is to get a ceasefire. And again, that's where the Biden administration has been wasting time and fueled the war instead of stopping it.
In the 90 seconds I have left, what are you tracking and what ought we be paying attention to? Not that we can control this narrative, but how concerned are you, let me put it that way, about something that would be game-changing in this presidential race that would jump off in the Middle East?
Well, I think the big game changer here would be if Harris came out and said that she will withhold weapons sales and shipments to Israel unless there is a ceasefire. That would change the situation on the ground dramatically. Now, I'm not predicting that she necessarily will do so, but all of this talk about favoring a ceasefire without declaring how you will get it, and that declaration being different from what Biden has done so far, is ultimately going to be unconvincing.
Yeah. And how concerned are you finally here that the Middle East will explode? If for the moment we've averted a wider war, I heard your point, we're not quite out of the woods yet, but if this thing just blows up in the Middle East, you heard Kamala trying real hard to convince people that she could be commander-in-chief. She even used the word lethal, which shocked many of us, yours truly included. But what's your sense of how that might change how people view who the two candidates are?
I think if you end up having a major war in the region beyond what we already have before the elections, it will come to the detriment of Kamala Harris and to the benefit of Trump.
Sadly.
And this is part of the reason why she has a political interest in putting stop in it herself. Forget about whether they sympathize with the Palestinians or the Israelis, doesn't matter. For her own political sake, putting a stop to it is essential.
We couldn't agree more in that regard. It would certainly, I think, accrue benefit to him and not her, but I digress on that for now. His name is Trita Parsi, brilliant writer, co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. We could use some of that right now, some responsible statecraft. I digress. Trita, good to have you on, my friend. All the best to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Just like that, 3 hours gone. Back here tomorrow, Lord willing, to do it all over again. Until then, thanks for tuning in to Tavis, Smiley. And as always, keep the faith.